This episode is a continuation of last week's conversation with Ata Hanifee, a Malaysian PhD student studying in the UK. Madam Azimah dives deeper into how Ata became fluent in English, exploring the unique methods and experiences that shaped his language skills. Additionally, Ata shares his exciting plans and aspirations for when he returns to Malaysia. We hope you enjoy the episode.
It was really fascinating to hear you and the way you told the stories. It was really great. Amazing. Okay. I forgot to ask how, or maybe you can give us tips. How did you become fluent in the language, even though you did not study abroad?
It's like one of those things that we've always had to think about in life. Like, how did I get good in English? And if I'm being honest, I'll attribute it to TV shows and video games.
What?
Right.
I didn't say I was a couch
My dad always play games.
Even now?
But yeah, even today, I still play video games. So
Rennie, I also play Minecraft, and my dad.
yeah, he picks up after
I
his dad a bit. This
see.
way, he plays a bit more video games as well. But yeah, I mean, as much as that's not very glamorous, but I always feel like I don't know, like I used to have this sort of let's say excuse. I say that I speak English at home. I actually don't. My mom and dad speak in full Malay to me. My siblings all speak in full Malay to me. So I've always wondered, where did I pick up my language? Where did I pick up my English? But yeah, and I guess in essence, it's about me having to use the language in a certain context as well. Because at the end of the day, the video games allowed me to sort of learn the language in a setting that is very much, there is context to it. It's not like, I'm not using I'm learning the language with situations. For example, as a game I played back then, they will have these cutscenes, right? It's a Star Wars game, right?
Okay.
Obviously there's a bit of mystery element to that game, and obviously I have to keep track of all these clues, because it's like, okay, so what am I learning here, right? I have to know this in order to progress the game. So I had to sort of just understand the language. But the idea is that these sort of things that I had to learn, I had to read things like instructions, walkthroughs. They call it walkthroughs because if you can't figure out this level of the game, you got to read out sort of like these guides on the internet. And it's in these activities that I just picked up the language as much as I can. And again, these cutscenes involve sort of like animated characters speaking in English, so you sort of mimic how they say and stuff like that, and you get the language. But for me, I think it's basically, if you want an example of someone who learns in English within a sort of isolated environment, I'm an example of that, I suppose. Just give me a minute. Yeah. And I'm sure Aisha can attest to the fact that she learns English by reading a lot of books as well. And it's another example because, again, she wouldn't necessarily say that her parents spoke to her in English every day, right? Or her siblings. She's the one that picked up English on her own. And what did she do when she was a child? She read a lot of books, like an extensive amount of books, basically. So I guess that's it, basically. And once you have that base of confidence, I started applying it more and more often. I went to a boarding school, like SBP, and I guess when you have a base of English, you sort of become this sort of like figure of, Ata, macam mana ni dalam English kan? And then you had to like practice it a bit more and there. And from then on, it just sort of grew into it. I took English at CFS, and just further and further. It just, contributed to it non-stop. Yeah.
So from video games, and then you took English as your degree.
Yeah.
So you started to read, add on the reading part.
Yeah,
later.
Yeah. I absolutely. I also read books. I was a Harry Potter. I'm a Harry Potter fan in the sense.
Books.
Yeah,
My books.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of English.
It's possible. I mean, I'm saying that you don't have to live abroad to be able to speak really well.
Oh, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
I mean, of course, absolutely. And you also don't have to be in an environment at home, but you have to make the effort.
Yeah, definitely. I do think
that's the
there has to be sort of like say that there has to be a some level of intrinsic motivation going into it, because the idea is that there has to be an incentive for you to practice English, right? Like for me, it was about figuring out my video games, right? Because I wouldn't be able to progress if I didn't understand the language. So I had to understand it. So it's like, oh, what does this mean? What does this say?
But you
Right? I
struggled
had
on
to
your
ask.
own to understand that. You had no one to ask and speak to,
I mean,
so
I
you had
did
to
ask
figure
my
out yourself.
siblings, I did ask my dad
Oh,
from time to time, but then I think I learned through, like, I went
No,
through
put it
something like
inside
when I
you.
read the guides and they gave me a much more simpler way to go about it. The context of the guide and what is being said, it's sort of like I'm able to make sense of the words now because of the guide, something like that. Yeah, it's a in a way it's a very
Put
complex way
that
of thinking
on
about it.
you.
But at the end of the day,
Mm.
it's incentivized learning in a sense. I
I see.
wanted to learn, yeah, because I wanted to move forward with my video games. I I had a sense of, again, intrinsic motivation, because we're talking with the speakers now. Yeah.
Ah.
God. Oh,
Like
he wants to
a
see
good
that.
example is this boy right here, right? He's playing this game called Minecraft. Now
I
he
play every game.
right, so he is learning a lot of different words that are obviously, if he didn't play Minecraft, it is beyond his vocabulary. Like he obviously learned things like armor, pickaxe. There's a what do you call that? What was it again?
Sword and hoe.
And hoe to dig. Right. So
No,
you
Yeah.
plant seeds.
Hoe
Yeah,
to plant
interesting.
Seeds, yeah, to make farms, right?
uh-huh.
Yeah. So he learns all this in a
Yeah.
way because there's an incentive for him to learn, because he learns the mechanics of the game and it's like, oh, okay, so what do I need to use, Papa? Oh, you use the hoe to dig, to till the soil. And he's gaining these vocabulary because
Yeah.
again, he wants to progress in the game. So
Yeah.
inadvertently he learns all these things. And again, these are, I would say, the sort of like the pros of having, I'm not just saying it's particularly just video games, but it could be any activity per se that involves a good level of English language ability, in that if someone were to delve in an activity and that activity basically sort of like is incorporated with English instructions, they would learn it simply because they want to, I guess.
Yeah.
I think that's part and parcel to it. It's like, oh, okay, how do I learn this? How do I learn this? So yeah, I mean, I'm glad he's.
And it's
I
fun.
mean, I'm glad he's picking up the language really quickly. But I'm also seeing that, yeah, it's like, oh yeah, part of it is because he has his activities, and he's learning through those activities. It doesn't feel like a total, it's not just fun, but you see he's developing. So yeah, I'm hoping that gives a bit of like, because I've never really like, really like say there's a lot of like these. I mean, Aisha is a good example. Like she says she probably learned English through reading, and I couldn't really say that to myself because I picked up reading late. I already had English before I picked up reading. So where did I pick up my English? And that's why I thought maybe you play games a lot. That's why you can. So yeah,
I understand.
that's probably
I get
it.
that.
Yeah,
Because I don't play video games, so but my sister plays video games. Yeah, and my children now they play video games. Abang and sister.
Yeah.
But they don't play actually. They watch YouTubers play video games.
Do they have sort of like this talk to the screen as they play, because they're sort of like mimicking the streamers?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, as much as it is concerning, there's a part of it that you can appreciate in that, oh, look at that, they have all these new words.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it is a bit concerning, just just screaming to the screen
I
as if
know.
we have an audience.
But they learn how to react. I mean, they learn like
Yeah.
how to express themselves, their emotions, and
Yeah,
all of that.
they-
But I'm
Yeah, they do.
pros and cons to that.
It's just
Okay.
a matter of limiting it as well. I do feel like with Armin, he only plays during the weekend, mostly because I'm working on the
Mm,
weekdays and he plays with
mm,
my laptop as well. So he only plays in the weekends, and in the
mm,
weekends he's basically able to, like, get into this. Okay, like, and I guess the part of it that I'm happy with is his discipline with it. He's actually very disciplined in terms of
mm.
he
Oh,
starts playing in the
wow.
morning, he will stop
Mhm.
dead at 12 in the afternoon.
Oh.
At first we had to tell him to stop, but after a
Mm.
while he sort of just stopped by himself, and he realized that he doesn't want to play this the whole day. He will stop at 12
Oh,
and he wants to do something else afterwards, and
that's good.
we're pretty happy with that. Yeah, that he's able to sort of self-regulate his own scheduling.
That's
And
great.
yeah.
Amazing. Okay, all
Ah,
right, right. Wait, just one
yeah.
last question. I'm sorry
Oh,
to keep you, but just
no,
one
no,
last
it's all right. It's
question.
all right. Always happy to share.
How? Yeah, tell me about your PhD. I mean, a little bit
Mhm.
like how are you going to apply it in our local scene? You know, in our
So
in the film industry,
the
that if
yeah, yeah.
possible.
The bit of background to how I ended up doing a PhD in film adaptation is partly because I am technically what the program that I'm doing right now. Not the program, basically
Mm,
what the English department. I'm attached to the English department, the English literature
mm,
department,
mm.
So they were always sort of looking for someone to take up this literary film adaptation role, a scholar in film adaptation of literature. There's a
Okay.
professor that used to be my supervisor for my master's,
Mm.
English professor, Professor Nicholas Pagan. I think he's retired because I can't see his profile in the
Mm.
website anymore. But
Okay.
the he was the one who basically taught on the subject. Again, they call it from book to screen, basically film adaptation of literature.
Oh wow. Okay.
So they were always looking for someone to sort of, okay, we need someone to take over this subject because
Mm.
Professor Pagan is going to retire soon. And it just so
Mm.
happens that I was his supervisee. They were looking at it
Mm.
and like, you know what, this guy could do it. And
Mm.
they said, are you willing to do a PhD? We're willing to, offer you a scholarship for you to, further
Wow.
your studies in the
Mm.
UK. So that's the context of how I got the scholarship, because basically I am sort of like the, pelapis, as they call it in Malay, like,
Mm.
a replacement,
But
let's say, for
you were
my.
doing this for your masters too, something to related to
I did,
film.
yeah, I did,
I
because
see.
there's a long lineage of how I got here that all comes back to linguistics. So
Uh-huh.
you have a
Uh-huh.
hand in this as well, if I may say
Oh,
so,
happy to
because
hear
the idea is that I had a foundation with you in linguistics, right?
that.
Now,
Mm.
I always sort of saw myself as a bit of I like linguistics, but I'm very good at literature, but I've
Mm.
never really sort of delved into it. So this idea that I can meld my sort of like my propensity for literature with my interest in linguistics into one worked out in stylistics. I don't know
Mm.
if you are familiar with Dr. Nora. You're
Mhm.
acquainted with Dr. Nora, yeah.
Yeah.
So he was the one who introduced me to linguistics, right? Sorry,
Yeah.
stylistics, right?
Okay.
Basically, it's basically literary linguistics. Basically, you
Mm.
study the linguistics of literary language. So
Yeah.
that's how I got there. So when I went into my master's, I sort
Mm.
of proposed this, oh, why don't we use the sort of framework in stylistics in order to inform adaptation into film? Like, find the sort of effects of literary text and make sure it gets transferred into film. And that
Mhm.
became my master's thesis. Now, so the idea was I came here, uh, I extended that by basically solidifying my film expertise.
Mm.
So I over here I did a lot of, again, film theory. I studied film theory and all that. And funny enough,
Mhm.
I found that there's a lot of, say, parallel ideas between stylistics and film theory, at least film analysis. So the idea was I melded them together into this one framework of, I call it a poetics model of adaptation, right? So I look at the effects of a text and how it's transferred into a film text. And I argue that this is the kind of sort of faithfulness that people are looking for, because a lot of the times when people complain about, oh, this text is not being faithful, they're not really complaining about the little bits and elements, like, like, for example, Harry Potter. Like, you change Hermione's hair, she's no longer frizzy haired, she's now, say, she's actually very straight haired, for example. Or you change all these minor details, people don't actually care that much. But when you change a sort of like how they experience how they got the reading experience and how it feels so different to the viewing experience, that's when they start to get bothered. A good example I always give is Lord of the Rings. Is that Lord of the Rings is very unfaithful, because it's like it's there's so many changes to the from the text to the film, but the sense of epicness of reading the text and the sense of epicness in watching the film basically is retained. And this is where people feel like, oh, this is such a faithful adaptation. But if you go to the minute details, none of it is actually faithful. So I always feel like, yeah, that's my thesis basically, is to propose, okay, I call it a fidelity to effect. It's not even something I coined. It's I took from somewhere, a scholar in the past that already talked about this, but never really extended on it. So I extended on the idea by informing, by basically informing the adaptation process using stylistic frameworks, and basically making sure that it is the sort of effect is retained through film analysis frameworks. So yeah, that's basically my thesis. The idea is for me to come back to Malaysia, and if I'm being sort of like ambitious about my sort of my ideas and my thesis, is just kickstart a sort of adaptation industry in Malaysia. I mean, it's not that there's not an adaptation. There is actually. We are actually quite. If I look at the sort of like the history of Malaysian TV series, for example, a lot of it actually came from novels, adapted novels from the Malaysian publication. Yeah, so there is already a thriving scene of adaptation. In fact, I think the only difference is that are they informed by sort of like theory and all that. Again, if the industry itself is interested to be informed by theory, maybe the idea is about marketability, or as a commodity, whether it catches an audience. But at least if they're looking for someone who's able to inform them in terms of theoretical how to approach an adaptation, I'll be able to do that. If I can't basically break into the industry anyway, I'll probably do it on my own. I've already got ideas. I've already got sort of like reached out to different authors and talked about, hey, can I turn this into a film? Oh, sure. And I sort of leverage like, oh, I'm a lecturer in English in UM. I'd like to turn your short story into a short film. And they're like, oh, yeah, sure. So the idea is that I can use that as not just practice, but somehow produce papers out of it. And that's sort of my goal, I guess, in the long term. Be a sort of filmmaker come academic. So.
Interesting. But then you're not going to be just doing it in English. I mean, once to come to Malaysia, I mean, are you looking at novels in Bahasa Melayu?
Yeah,
as well.
The thing is that you know how academics sometimes they have these sort of like different strands to their research interests. And one of the strands that I'm definitely looking to get into is to develop a sort of stylistics of Malay, because I feel like it's one of those things where I'm like, I have so much stylistics in English. It's a pity that I don't have a stylistics of my own language, right? But that probably means I have to work with a lot of Malay language scholars, and I'm definitely happy to do so, right? I'm definitely happy to sort of like, I have all these frameworks of linguistic, stylistic analysis in my head. Now it's a matter of, okay, how can we apply this to the Malay language? And I'm sure it's applicable, because at the end of the day, the base of stylistic is language. It doesn't necessarily mean what kind of language, but there are obviously going to be differences. But that is probably one of my strands that I'm going to go into. So stylistics of Malay. And then the hope is, again, we can incorporate that into the adaptation of Malay novels or novellas and stuff like that. And develop again this sort of creative industry in Malaysia. At the end of the day, I'm just frankly happy if I can actually, get involved with film in one way or another.
Yeah, definitely. So interesting, mashallah. Wow. Okay. So your future is all laid out. Inshallah. All the plans there again.
Inshallah, inshallah, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay lah. So we'll end it here. I'm not going to take more of your time, but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Okay. Bye, Ata. Assalamualaikum.
Salam.